Shalom, everyone. My name is Tamara Reshef, and I'm the Senior Community Shlicha for Greater Metro West. We are heartbroken by the events of the last 12 days. With so many of our friends and family in Israel already lost and others taken captive, we are praying for the safety and success of the Israel Defense Forces as they move forward to protect our country. Today, we are thankful to have Major Ben Wallhouse from the IDF present a briefing of the IDF's military operations in Gaza. Major Ben Wallhouse is an IDF spokesperson. Major Ben serves for 12 years in the IDF International Law Department, with his last role being a head of international negotiations and agreements. Major Ben, on behalf of the Greater Metro West community, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here with you, despite the circumstances. And it's really very hard to try and fathom the events that took place here last Saturday. And it's also hard to comprehend that it's been 12 days since then. Part of that is because the stories are continuing to unfold as our forces, through the few days of last week, went through the south and spent a few days clearing the area of terrorists, repelling attacks that kept coming through the border fence that was breached from Gaza. And as survivors started to come out, we started to hear the stories. We're still hearing those stories today. And the number of dead keeps rising. Each day, the number is rising. And that's not because every day more civilians are being killed. It's because it's taking so long to count and identify all those who were killed. Some of our forces have been doing limited raids into Gaza, into the border area where some bodies were left, and we've had to collect those. We've had to defuse booby-trapped bodies that were left in the homes in kibbutzim and communities around Gaza. And in some cases where entire families were murdered, we have no one from whom to take DNA in order to identify who they were. So the death count is climbing, and unfortunately, where it stands at the moment is not likely to be the final number. Since those brutal, horrific massacre on Saturday, which the whole world now knows about, we've been in a war against Gaza, against Hamas. Our war is against Hamas. Hamas's war is a war against civilians. It started with this brutal, horrific massacre of women, children, entire families, large populations of kibbutzim. And I'm sure you all know what a kibbutz is like. A kibbutz is one big family. So for these kibbutzim to lose 10%, 15% of their people is to lose an entire family. They abducted some 200 Israeli citizens who they're holding now as hostage in the Gaza Strip. And they've continuously fired rockets indiscriminately into our civilian population centers. They fire them in barrages to try and overcome the Iron Dome. They're firing them at ranges that they have never fired before. And they're firing continuously until this very moment. At the same time, they're using their own civilians to protect their military operations in Gaza. Hamas has governed Gaza for almost 20 years. And they've used that time, instead of building Gaza for the good of its population, they've used their resources, their training, their materials, the support that they receive from their regional partners, mostly Iran. They've used it to plan and carry out attacks like this one. And they've used it to turn Gaza into this terrorist stronghold to make it more difficult for us to fight and root them out. So they use their own civilians as human shields. They place all their military operations within, amongst, and beneath the civilian population. Houses, mosques, schools, hospitals are used as command and control centers, weapons depots, terrorist hideouts and operational meeting points. And that's what we're operating against. They also steal from their own population. You may have seen that a couple of days ago, UNRWA, the UN agency operating in Gaza, was forced to acknowledge that Hamas militants or whoever broke into one of their warehouses and stole a huge amount of fuel that was destined for the civilian population. The amount of fuel that they stole was enough to serve their desalination plants for 6 days. They stole 6 days worth of fuel, which would give water to their population. On the first day of the attack, their rockets hit 9 out of 10 electricity lines leading from Israel into Gaza, and hit 1 out of the 3 water pipes leading from Israel into Gaza. They also invaded the Erez crossing, which is the main crossing through which people pass from Israel and Gaza. And before that Saturday, every day, tens of thousands of Gazans were passing through that crossing into Israel with work permits to work in Israel. They overran that crossing. They destroyed it. They killed many of the people that I serve with. They abducted others. So that crossing is out of action. And the other main crossing in the south of Israel, the Kerem Shalom, is closed because it's under rocket fire as we speak from Hamas. The third crossing, the Rafah crossing into Egypt, is not something that's under our control. So they systematically steal from their people. They hurt their ability to receive aid and humanitarian supplies. And they endanger their civilian population by fighting from amongst them and hiding beneath them. So we're engaged in an intensive war there. We are hitting hundreds of targets every few hours. We are operating throughout the entire Gaza Strip. We do plan to operate in the northern Gaza Strip in a more intensive manner. And we're taking steps to plan for that now. At the same time, our forces, for a few days after the Saturday massacre, was clearing the area of forces of Hamas terrorists in the south. We had repeated attacks from the land, from the sea, from the air, of Hamas terrorists trying to get into Israeli cities, sometimes succeeding. And we had tens of thousands of forces going house by house in all the over 20 towns and communities in which Hamas terrorists conducted their attacks. At the same time, we are facing threats in the north of Israel. Over the past few days, we have had a number of attacks from Lebanon and from Syria, mostly from Hezbollah, but also from other terrorist organizations, all of them Iranian proxies. This has been anti-tank fire, rocket fire, drones, and other attempted attacks. All of them so far have been repelled or responded to by the IDF with artillery fire or aerial attacks towards the sources of those fire. And we have made it very clear, our military and our government have made it very clear that we do not want to see any escalation in the north, as has President Biden. And part of the purpose of the presence of two carrier groups and Secretary Blinken's visits and President Biden's visits is to make that message heard strongly. I think it's a very challenging and traumatic thing that you have a country that experienced the trauma of last Saturday with a population of only 9 million people to have 13, 14, even more 100 people killed in a very short space of time in a brutal way, affects every single one of us in a very strong way. And the nation is certainly going through a trauma. To hear these stories every night on the news and every day in the newspapers is heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, and traumatic. We also have displaced peoples. We've evacuated all the communities around the Gaza area, tens of thousands of people. We're evacuating communities up north, which are more tens of thousands of people. So all these people are displaced. They've left their home. Sometimes they've lost their home. They've left their families. Sometimes they've lost their families. And the country is having to deal with that. At the same time, we can't address that mourning too much because we're in a state of war. Over 300,000 reserve duty soldiers have been pulled up and are deployed mostly down south and up north. And these are people who's, everyone knows someone who's been called up. And most people who have been called up know someone who's been directly affected by these attacks. So it's a very complex time for Israel to be both mourning and fighting simultaneously. And I think this complexity will last for a very long time. No matter how long the war continues, the rehabilitation and the recovery road will be very, very long, both for these people individually who have experienced and survived these horrors, and both for the nation as a whole. Certainly economically, rebuilding entire communities, psychologically helping people deal with their trauma. It will be a very long road for Israel ahead. And here I think to look what's happened with Israeli society is quite incredible. There is definitely a big sense of unity here. There is a huge effort by civil society to aid those who have experienced these horrors, those who have kidnapped people through their families, and those who are serving now in reserve duty or in the IDF or other security organizations. Organizations like Achim Leneshek, Brothers in Arms, who a few months ago were leading the protests against the judicial reforms, have taken their logistical capabilities and have made incredible efforts at getting our basic needs to community displaced families and gear to IDF soldiers who need them. And that is an incredible thing to see. Plane loads of Israelis have flown home. Thousands of Israelis from all over the world to help out. And the Israeli society also really sees and appreciates the support we're getting from Jewish communities around the world. They see the pictures of the Israeli flag being projected onto landmark buildings. They see the rallies, they see the messages of support, and it definitely means a lot to the Israeli people. So to have that solidarity and to have that support is very meaningful. The fight ahead is not going to be easy. The government has set as its aim to destroy Hamas's military capabilities. Hamas's military capabilities are not nothing. They've had a long time to stock themselves up from Iran. They control territory, which gives them the freedom to train and use that territory in order to prepare for ground operations. And they control their population so they can use them and direct them as human shields. All of these activities by Hamas are war crimes. Directly targeting the civilian population in Israel is a war crime. It's a violation of the principle of directly targeting civilians. Endangering your own population is a violation of the prohibition on endangering your own population. Each side has an active obligation to try and protect its civilian population and to try and separate them from the hostilities. Whereas Hamas provides its civilian population with no defenses, there are no bomb shelters, there are no aerial warning systems, and they actively put them in harm's way. They've violated the prohibition on taking hostages, which includes IDF soldiers when you use them as bargaining chips. They've violated the prohibition on perfidy when they dress as IDF soldiers and as civilians in order to carry out attacks. And they violated the prohibition on booby-trapping certain objects, including dead bodies. These are all war crimes under international law. They are also crimes against humanity. Crimes against humanity are those acts which are conducted in a widespread and systematic manner, according to a certain policy. And Hamas's policy is clear. It's stated explicitly in its charter that it aims to wipe out all of Israel. It aims to kill as many Jews as it can. And it's certainly done this in a widespread and systematic and ongoing manner with its ongoing rocket fire. It also may constitute the crime of genocide because they have the intent to wipe out the whole or part of a certain group or people. And they have done that in a mass way with their mass murders. On the other hand, this makes it an asymmetric conflict because on the other hand, you have the IDF. The IDF is a military belonging to a democratic state that's committed to the rule of law, and we operate according to international law. The IDF only targets military targets in line with the principle of distinction. It does not intentionally target civilians or civilian objects. We take precautions in order to mitigate civilian harm, whether that's in the choice of our munitions, the timing of our attacks, or efforts to try and move civilians away from certain areas. Over the past few days, we have been given numerous warnings to the Gazan population to evacuate from northern Gaza and to move to southern Gaza because we intend to operate intensively in northern Gaza, while we continue to operate in southern Gaza, but more intensively in northern Gaza, because that's where Hamas has its stronghold. We have given these messages through radio, through TV, through social media, through international organizations, and dropping leaflets over the air. We've created corridors through which people can travel and which we will not be operating militarily to get them to move south. And we have constantly delayed the deadline in order to allow more and more people to evacuate south. We're also monitoring very carefully the humanitarian situation. The humanitarian situation is one absolutely of Hamas's making. It's kept its population in this poverty for 20 years. It's destroyed the humanitarian crossings between Israel and Gaza. It steals humanitarian aid for its own military uses. So it's certainly of its own making. We continue to monitor it very carefully. Just now when President Biden was here, there was an announcement by the Prime Minister that they aim to work towards safe zones in the south of Gaza through which aid can be facilitated through Egypt. And once all the hostages are released, Israel will renew facilitating the aid through its own territory. We have no legal obligation to provide Gaza with our own electricity and our own water and our own goods, which is what we have been doing for the last 15 years. There are certain obligations under international law to facilitate the passage of humanitarian goods, but those are subject to the knowledge and the certainty that they are not going to be hijacked for military use and that they will get to the civilian population. And that is a certainty that we do not have. In fact, we have the very opposite. We have proof that they are stealing from UNRWA warehouses and using it for their military needs. So that's something that continues to be in process and will probably be resolved in the next few days. If things break out in the north, it will be infinitely more complex. Hezbollah is as bad as Hamas in terms of its aims and its methods, but it is much worse than Hamas in terms of its capabilities, in terms of its arsenal, in terms of its resources and backing from Iran. Lebanon also controls a massive amount of territory in southern Lebanon, but it's also very much of the part of the Lebanese apparatus. It sits in the Lebanese parliament, it sits in the Lebanese cabinet, and in fact today, I think it might be a bit hard to distinguish between Lebanon and Hezbollah at all. We also face threats from Syria. We have a heating situation in the West Bank. But I think that the positive light out of all of this is that Israeli society is united and is resolute. And we feel the support of our partners. We feel the support of the US, both from the statements of President Biden, down to the very close military cooperation that we have and the direct support that we're getting, and that we feel from our partners and communities around the world. So we are resolute. We will win this war. We will rebuild our lives, and we'll do it in coordination and with the support of Jewish communities around the world. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have or discuss any of these points at more length.
Sure. One of the questions that we're getting here is about the bombing of the hospital yesterday in Gaza, and if you can elaborate a little bit about that.
Sure. So as soon as we saw reports of a large blast at a hospital and claims of 500 people dead, we started looking into it immediately because the IDF makes every effort not to hit hospitals. That's not to say that they cannot become legitimate military targets. Under international law, if a hospital is used for military purposes and that use does not cease, it becomes a legitimate military target. There are certain precautions you have to take before you do that, but it can be struck. And that has happened in the past. In 2014, for example, in the Gaza conflict, Operation Protective Edge, there was a hospital that was used repeatedly and variously by Hamas for military purposes. We gave numerous warnings over a few days, called the hospital a few times over a few days, waited until everyone was evacuated, and then we attacked the hospital so Hamas couldn't use it anymore and there were no civilian casualties. In this case, there was no intent by the IDF to attack this hospital, so we didn't know what was happening. And then we started seeing in the media that Israel strikes a hospital directly, killing over 500 people. Obviously, that was concerning, particularly on the eve of President Biden's visit. So we made very, very quick, extremely quick checks through all our systems, Air Force, Navy, land forces, other security organizations, radar systems, everything. And every one of our systems came back saying that there was no attack by any Israeli forces in that vicinity at the time. Our radar indicated that there was a barrage of rockets launched from nearby the hospital, and the trajectory of those rockets went right over the hospital. Independent footage aired by Al Jazeera and other outlets at the time of the incident showed a rocket being fired, the barrage being fired, and one of those rockets falling short, misfiring, and falling into Gazan territory. And then we analyzed drone footage after the incident, and we could see inside the parking lot of the hospital an impact area, but the impact area did not reflect the kind of munitions that the IDF uses. When the IDF uses missiles, it generally leaves a small crater behind, and here there was no crater. We also didn't identify any direct hit on the hospital, only a direct hit inside the parking lot. We looked at our intelligence sources and we intercepted a phone call between Hamas operatives saying that they've just seen a rocket fall short on the hospital, that it looks like it's Islamic Jihad, that they didn't know of any Israeli strike in the area, and then talking amongst themselves about what are they going to do. We released that information, but we released that information only when we were absolutely sure. And that takes time. And by that time, most international media outlets were reporting an Israeli strike on a hospital causing over 500 deaths, without saying anything that these were claims by Hamas authorities in Gaza, and without verifying any of those facts. When we released our information, some outlets started changing their reporting somewhat, but certainly the damage was already done. You may have seen that a summit in Jordan that was planned for President Biden and other Arab leaders to discuss humanitarian aid to Gaza was cancelled. We had some condemnations from world leaders such as the Prime Minister of Canada, Congress people in the US, and there were riots throughout the Middle East outside US embassies, burning tires and so on outside US embassies. So this for us showed a couple of things. It showed the willingness again of Hamas to use its own civilian population as a tool, an absolute callousness for civilian life, whether it's ours or theirs, and a willingness to lie internationally in order to promote its aims and save itself when it knew that this was an Islamic Jihad rocket that fired short. It also showed us that, again, what you know, but you see it in practice, the power of the media. And sometimes the willingness of the media to accept allegations against us without any basis in fact. I think the IDF did very well in getting that information out quickly. It's not an easy thing to do, to release intelligence sources, to quickly gather information, visuals from various different units within the army and security organizations, and I think they did well. But it's certainly not the first time and certainly not the last time that something like that may happen.
Thank you. Another question is about the 200 people that were that are captive now in Gaza. Is there any things or details that you can share with us about what's being done to release them?
Other than that, we're doing everything we can. I can't share much more. We've set up, the Prime Minister set up a dedicated almost ministry to this issue, with a retired general heading the ministry, giving them all the resources that they need, intelligence, operations, and so on. We've had assistance from the Americans. President Biden sent over the Deputy Special Envoy for hostage situations to help and advise. And obviously, it's our highest priority to gather intelligence and information on those hostages. The Prime Minister called tonight on the Red Cross to ensure access to those hostages and to provide us with information as to their whereabouts and their physical situation as required by international law. You can imagine Hamas will probably react to that. For 5 years, when they held one of our soldiers hostage, Gilad Shalit, they didn't let the Red Cross visit once, and the Red Cross didn't press them too hard either. So we'll see what happens with that.
And last question, there's another front that Israel is fighting now, which is the social media and all the digital information that people are getting all the time. And there's a huge pro-Palestine movement through that. Is the IDF doing anything in that front? Are you
certainly. I think, firstly, what's important to recognize is that we have support from around the world. I mean, we have 2 carrier groups from your country here. The British have sent forces to the region. Denmark has sent forces to the region. The German Chancellor was here yesterday. The President of the European Union was here. Secretary Blinken here was twice. President Biden was here. We have incredible support from people and governments around the world. And I think that's what's important. The decision makers and those who matter are supporting us, who are behind us. I think they understand the importance of this fight. They understand that Israel cannot live next to an organization that carries out the kind of atrocities that it carried out last week, and that this is really a fight for humanity. It's a fight against those who commit crimes against humanity, not just Jews and Israelis, but humanity. Certainly, in public opinion on social media and whatever other media, it waxes and wanes. There's always going to be those people who are against you. That can rise, it can fall. I mean, Israel, the IDF spokesperson unit, I think, has a very good social media machine. They get out information very quickly. They have good messaging. We have good connections, good networks around the world with people like you and organizations that we work with. And I think we just have to keep getting out the truth. We just have to keep saying what it is that we're fighting for. We have to keep being reliable, even if it takes us time to respond to accusations. We need to make sure that we're checking and that we're being accurate. And I think that will ensure that the right people are standing with us, even if the public square in Twitter isn't.
Is there anything that we as a community can do to help in that front, at least?
I think just continuing to tell the truth to the world, to whatever corner of your world it is, whether it's your congressman or your local councillors or so on. There's plenty of information out there on Israeli social media accounts, helping getting the right people in front of cameras, military experts, legal experts who know what they're talking about. If you have local news stations, helping them get in front of the cameras. And continuing to show your support as you have done to us, because that really helps us and uplifts us. That's in the short term. And in the long term, I'm sure there will be so much need in Israeli society for your support as we seek to rehabilitate and recover from these absolute atrocities.
Thank you again, Major Ben, for this informative update. Our thoughts and our prayers are with you and all of the soldiers in harm's way. We're hoping you succeed in your mission and that peace comes soon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and for your support.
Thank you, everyone who joined this webinar. Please keep an eye on our information of the upcoming Federation events about Israel these days ahead. Thanks a lot.